All right, here we go. This is that moment of truth. This is that moment of truth. This is the new system. This is the new system. It takes a little bit longer. It's the new system. Takes a minute or there it goes. There it is. Yes. Yes, we've seen it. Yeah, this is I'm getting excited about the new system. You guys will have to bear with me. Cuz we're on Rockfin now too. We're on Rockfin and we're on the YouTubes but I need to see it. Am I seeing it? Am I seeing it? Where is it? There it is. Yes. Yes, I have seen it and it is good. I have seen it and it is good. All right. What's up, everybody? Good afternoon to all my East Coasters. Good morning to everybody in my time zone, West Coast. My guest today, also on the West Coast. And good evening if you're in an evening time zone. And hello to the future, New Zealand, Australia. You're a day ahead. Can you fix climate change for the rest of us? You're in the future. We're counting on you. This is technically day 3, but officially day 2 of my new setup. And the system has changed a little bit, but we are now streaming on Rockfin. So I appreciate your patience and your kindness and your understanding as I get used to this new system. There's a little bit of a lag because, or a lull rather, because I do not have an on-site producer. So I need to see it all for myself and make sure we're live. And there's another step involved. But so far, I've been loving it a bunch, and I hope you all have too. Anyway, special thanks to everyone who makes this show possible. Our friends over at ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Their tea kind of rules. And you can get their tea wholesale now because of the pandemic. And we're getting closer to that Ron tea. Keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully it's coming soon. But in the meantime, show them some love. Our friends over at triageoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Trendy name makes pain oil for your body, and it works wonders. I appreciate all the care packages, especially the ones with the guitar picks. You know that makes my afternoon. And finally, Indie Left. Indie Left is the only place to find all the articles and videos from your favorite outlets and creators. I'm there. The outlet gets updated twice a day. Now, to learn more and subscribe to everything they got going on and to join their Discord community, they got a Discord community going strong. Check them out on the web at independentleft.media. That's independentleft.media. Also, yours truly did their theme song. I did their theme. And if you want your own theme song, by the way, patreon.com/Rob Lacone. For a give what you can level, I'll make you a theme song. Again, that's a give what you can level, whatever you're comfortable giving. Patreon.com/Rob Lacone. All right, without further ado, my guest today is in my neighborhood. This is a guy who is a local activist. He is an environmental activist, and he is running for city council in 2022 in my district. So let's see if I'm going to vote for him or not. Let's see what he's got. I am. I mean, yeah, our current guy's a cop, and we're going to get into it. But please welcome to the show, Bryant Odega. What's up, Bryant? How are you, buddy?
Hey, Ron. Thank you so much for having me here for your awesome introduction. I'm glad to be here.
You're welcome, buddy. Thanks for doing this show. I want to kick it off by showing people your video that's talking about basically everything you're about and your run. So we're going to go ahead and watch that first to start out here. So here it is. This is your Twitter account that everyone should check out. Bryant Odega LA is the handle there. And here is the video. Let's get it going.
I've lived in this district all my life. My parents are immigrants from Nigeria. My father was a taxi cab driver, and my mother is a home health nurse. When I was 7, ICE took my father away and deported him back to Nigeria. We lived in rent-controlled apartments and relied on public assistance to get by. My mother has been working on the front lines during this pandemic as a nurse, and this crisis has further revealed the cracks within our system. Black and brown folks are getting sick and dying at disproportionate rates. Our rent is too high, putting many of us on the brink of homelessness. Our communities are targeted and abused by the police, and our neighborhoods are hit hardest by pollution and toxic waste. These problems have existed before the pandemic, but they are getting worse. We've had the same representation for nearly a decade, and as my opponent has been supporting real estate projects of his campaign donors and failing to keep police accountable, our communities continue to struggle. It's time for a change. My name is Bryant Odega, and I'm running for Los Angeles City Council District 15 in 2022. I am an environmental justice activist, a community advocate, and a working class Angelino. I'm running because we need ethical, moral leadership in City Hall. We need someone who looks like us, knows what it's like growing up in our community, and is committed to fighting for all of us to bring the change we need. That's why, unlike my opponent, I am not accepting money from corporations, fossil fuels, real estate developers, or cops. I believe that housing is a human right. We need to ensure stronger winter protections, house every Angelino, reimagine public safety, and enact a Green New Deal. We need a people-powered grassroots movement to get the representation we deserve. When we rise up and stand together, we make change and win together. We can have a Los Angeles that includes all of us, but we need leaders who have the courage to act. It's time for one of us for a change.
It's a good video.
Thank
Good
you.
video. Here, let me go ahead and retweet it right now and tell everyone to tune in. We'll do it live here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, of course. So you've lived in this district your entire life,
Right.
and when you were 7, ICE deported your father.
Right. So yeah, my dad, he was detained twice by ICE in the detention center here in like the San Pedro County area. And so when he was detained due to like the high cost of fighting immigration case in America, as well as the poor conditions that he was forced to endure for months in the center, which is basically a prison just in another name, he decided to leave the country because it was just too much for him to bear. And yeah, I was between the ages of 7 or 8 years old when that
Well,
happened.
what was that like for you emotionally? I mean, what was it like just going through that?
Right. So we'll usually visit during the night. But I remember going inside the facility but never actually seeing my dad because my mom didn't want me or my sister, who was like 1 or 2 years old at the time, to see my father in the jumpsuit. And so I guess really when we were at the airport, that's when I was fully aware of what was going on in regards to him leaving. And um, and for a few years after, so between by the end of elementary school, early middle school, we will call, or we will use calling cards back before there was like WhatsApp or any of these other social apps, and I always thought, next year he will come back, next year he'll come back. But then by the time I was like in middle school, I came under the realization that he probably won't be coming back anytime soon or at all. And so for almost 15 plus years since my dad, had to leave the country, I haven't seen him ever since.
Are you still in touch with him?
Yeah, so we still talk, we still text, virtual call, but um, I haven't like seen him like personally, for a long time.
That's really heavy, man. I mean, condolences. That's intense.
Thank you.
Do you still vividly remember the moment at the airport?
Yes, so I remember um, being there, LAX. That was my first time going to an airport as well, by the way. Um, Being there with my mom, with my father's younger brother. Um, I remember seeing him go up the escalator. I remember seeing him look back before going up the escalator, and then seeing him go off. And yeah, that was my last memory of my father.
Wow. So, well, let's get into some of the other content in the video and some of the things that are important to you.
Right.
So, in how were you doing in environmental activism before you decided to run for city council? Like, what was your involvement there?
Right. So I sit in my neighborhood council right here in Harbor Gabby South. And basically, neighborhood council system is basically it's an opportunity for local residents and neighbors to, get involved on a local level without having to, run for city council themselves. And in our district, there's a lot of like industrial activity going on and a lot of oil wells. And so I was very well aware of the pollution and the tainted air that we are forced to breathe in and endure. And so there's an opportunity for me to get involved, and that was brought by Food and Water Watch, which is an organization dedicated to pushing for environmental justice. And um, in 2019, they were pushing LADWP to pass to study a scenario where we can achieve 100% renewable energy by 2035. Because at the time, they were only looking at two scenarios, but they were both in 2045. And according to the science, from scientists all across the world, um, climate change is changing at a faster rate than we expected. So it's, 2045 is too late, right? And so I decided to get involved in pushing that, making that happen. I spoke to my neighborhood council where we passed it unanimously. I spoke to the neighborhood councils in Harper City, in Northwest San Pedro, and in Coastal San Pedro. And in partnership with them, other community leaders, we were able to have LADWP approve the scenario. And so now, actually, this year, they're almost done finishing their study. And so, on that level, that's how I kind of got my start in environmental activism. But I also am part of the Sunrise Movement, which is a national organization, youth-led, dedicated to passing a Green New Deal, halting climate change, and creating millions of good, paying jobs in the process. And so I've been part of the Los Angeles chapter since 2019, and through that, I've spoken at city council. I've engaged in protests. I helped out with our climate strike that we had here in LA, the biggest climate strike in Los Angeles in LA's history. I also was part of the outreach team, speaking to college students at UCLA, where I transferred to from El Camino, speaking to students at LA Trade Tech, and just really trying to grow the movement. And so that's the type of involvement I've had in regards to pushing for environmental justice.
Well, thanks for doing that. And by the way, to everyone listening, we'll point out real quick here because we noticed this in the green room. Bryant is dealing with a broken fire alarm. So you may hear that every now and again, but we wanna assure everybody everything's okay. He's fine. There's nothing is on fire. The alarm is just broken. It's not like he was like, oh, something's on fire. And I was like, well, you're doing the interview anyway, Bryant. Sit down. Sit down. Not what's
Sorry
going
about
on.
that, y'all.
I don't want any. Well, I just want to make sure no one thinks that I'm like, no, you got to do the interview. Sit down. Sit down. We got to get through this. So yeah. But well, let's get into localized Green New Deals because I've had these conversations with people before. What is the potential for a localized Green New Deal? Not just here in Los Angeles, but just in general, like localized Green New Deals. What is the potential for them? What can be in them, and what would you try to enact when you get elected to city council?
Right. So, since it's early, I'm still doing a lot of research into this, and as I'm going over my plans, I'm also working in conjunction with community leaders, organizers, residents, and experts. But so far, as far as a Green New Deal, what does that look like for LA? It's about you're really saving our future, right? Climate change, is real, as some politicians, like to tweet out as if that's enough. But not only is it real, it's happening right here in Los Angeles. Last year we had wildfires. Every year is always a record setting. Every year in the summer is always a record setting hot temperatures, and so it means that our city has a duty, a role, more responsibility to address this crisis at the scale and urgency required. Now, unlike many other cities in the country, what's unique about LA is that we have a publicly owned utility. Actually, it's one of the largest public owned utilities in the country. And so we have an even greater opportunity to really lead the country in transitioning to a 100% clean, renewable energy economy. And
Well,
um,
what utility specifically are you referring to when you say that? Like,
right.
what are you referring to?
So the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power
Okay.
is a publicly owned utility, governed by the city of LA, and um, And so it's elected. They have a board of elected representatives, and that's what I mean by public-owned utility. And so, um, the Green New Deal is not just about halting climate change, but it's also about facilitating environmental justice, because we can transition into a green economy while also continuing the disparities in our society. And so what that means is, Black and Brown communities are disproportionately impacted by, pollution. Watts, for example, which is in our district, has a study conducted by the city showing that there's a 12-year lifespan disparity between folks in Watts and those in Brentwood, which is a more affluent neighborhood in LA County. And that's largely due to the heavy toxic waste that gets built up in Watts. It's due to the heavy pollution, the lack of tree coverage. We need trees to help um, clean our air. And so having a neighborhood that's as dense as Watts, but have less than 5% tree coverage, really leads to systemic, injustice there. Wilmington, which is, less than 10 minutes away from here, right next to San Pedro, um, there are thousands of households who live less than half a mile away from oil wells. And these oil wells, they give off pollutants into the air that folks, children, parents, etc., breathe in, day out for years on end. And as a result, folks have short-term symptoms like watery eyes or bloody noses because of how toxic the air is. But in the long term, Wilmington residents have one of the highest rates of cancer in all of California, but also have an increased risk of having a miscarriage or asthma and many other health ailments. And so Green New Deal is not just about halting climate change, but also bringing justice to frontline communities. And then also it means creating, a lot of good jobs. The green economy is renewable energy is the fastest growing sector in the energy industry. And in California, like 56% of the jobs are in the green economy, and um, for the Green New Deal, it's really important that we make sure these jobs are union jobs, because just like we can continue transitioning to economy, we can transition to an economy where the inequities can still exist. So too can they exist in the workplace. So it's also about democratizing, the workplace by supporting workers' right to a union. My dream is to have the whole entire energy sector be unionized. And because we know that with a union, workers tend to have better wages, better benefits, and they can better advocate for themselves, because it's as a collective, to ensure that they and their families are whole. And so we have to make sure that these jobs, because workers are going to be impacted, right, by the Green New Deal, by transitioning. Um, if we really are serious about transitioning to a carbon-free economy, that means there are some jobs that won't be able to exist anymore. And so, um, the issue isn't the workers themselves who work in the fossil fuel industry, but more so, the fossil fuel executives, right, and the industry at large. And so we want to make sure that when we push for Green New Deal, we protect workers um, by providing things like apprenticeships, fully paid, providing jobs in the new economy. And so, really, the Green New Deal is a multitude of things. It's a social justice policy, it's a climate policy, and it's also a jobs program.
So, and you think that something like this would be well received in an area like San Pedro because, first of all, it's a harbor town where nature plays a big role in
Right.
everything, and secondly, it is also a very union strong town and has been for many years. Do you think residents are eager for this type of thing?
Right. So residents are, um, Yeah, I've spoken to folks like Wilmington, for example, who are well aware of the environment. And the ports is also a heavy polluter in the city, and folks who live near the ports also have high rates of health illnesses, and people are well aware of this. And that's why majority of residents, polled in places like Wilmington supports like a buffer zone, for example, 2,500 feet buffer zone between oil wells and families. And even right now in the city council, they're even going beyond that and pushing for phasing out oil wells altogether. Um,
Did they
but
give a timeline on that?
so last time I recall, it has to go through like two other committees, and so it's still going to take a while. And I'll be monitoring that and spreading and raising awareness on that issue. But Food and Water Watch has really been at the forefront of pushing that. But in regards to residents, so I do believe that residents um, do support this. I think it's just a matter of 'cause oftentimes when people hear like transition, some folks hear like job losses, and so um, I want to make sure that when we push for a Green New Deal, it's not just something that is coming from us, top down, right? But it's in collaboration with community residents, that union, that labor is involved, because at the end of the day, unions, they have to protect their members, and so we want to make sure that we ensure that their members and their workers are safe. Because the issue is not the workers themselves; it's just the need to make sure that our economy isn't running on fossil fuels. And so if that means, making our trucks, because there's a lot of trucks active in our district, making sure that they don't emit any carbon, or making the ports more green, or and there's a variety of ways we can go about cleaning our harbor region without having to sacrifice jobs. But altogether, um, you know, majority of our residents do support this. It's just the fact. The main issue, honestly, isn't really the residents themselves, is the people in power, right? Joe Busquino isn't in support of a buffer zone, which is honestly a compromise um, solution, which is it's the first step, right, to phasing out oil wells. And Busquino isn't even willing to support this, despite the fact that families are literally getting sick and dying as a result of this environmental racism. And so overall, residents I've spoken to are more than well aware of the environmental crisis, the climate calamity that we're in right now. And it's just a matter of ensuring that residents are engaged and that they're involved and that we don't leave people out of the process.
So let's get into. I mean, you mentioned your opponent. Now, San
Right.
Pedro is and the district involves more than San Pedro. I could just speak to San Pedro the best because that's where I live. But
Right.
it was interesting to me when I first got here, which I'm still the new guy in town. I've only been here 4 months, but it was so interesting to me when I get to this town that it's definitely a left-leaning place, which made me happy. There's a progressive newspaper in town. It's a union strong town. It's a punk rock town. And then you
Right.
find out, oh, our city council person's a cop. How did this happen? How did, this doesn't add up. I feel like this isn't. I'm not a fan. And he's the more I learn about him, the less I like him. And so let's get into law enforcement. You bring that up in your video. Are you for defunding the police?
Right. So it depends on what you mean, right? When you say defund the police, if you're talking about reallocating funds from police budgets into largely defunded services like city services, community services, social work, etc., then yes, I'm a huge supporter of that because for too long, our communities, our talk about defunding, our communities have been defunded, historically and presently. And there's actually a direct linkage between disinvestment from social services and an increase in law enforcement. Because unfortunately, in the city of LA, and really, it's prevalent in cities all across the country, there's more of a prioritization on policing the outcomes of, economic and social um, inequality rather than actually addressing the root causes of these issues. And so, in the city of LA, for example, we have a $1.8 billion budget, $1.8 billion for the LAPD, which is about 54% of the city's general funds. So that means that things like uh, outreach for the homeless, or even something, city services like filling potholes or putting in place stop signs, etc. Those services are largely left behind. Things like funding, um, eviction defense uh, services, that's largely defunded. And so overall, we have a problem in regards to our values, because if you look at our budget, you can really, judge a society, a government based off of how um, based off of its budgetary process. And so in our city, we prioritize policing really our way out of every situation, whether it's dealing with homelessness, instead of you know uh, prioritizing funding public housing, funding access to clean restrooms and services of that nature. We instead focus on um, paying police officers to displace people, basically. And that's not a solution to ending homelessness. We know that the number one cause of homelessness in LA is for both single adult individuals as well as um, families is due to lack of affordable housing. And so, spending millions of dollars on police is not going to solve that problem. Handcuffs are not house keys. Jail cell is not a home. Um,
Well, and services not sweep, to use
right.
the popular hashtag that Street Watch LA has popularized. Services not sweeps. It is that
Right.
simple.
Right. Simple as that. And so honestly, these issues aren't really that complicated. Um, it's Our communities are underfunded, and there's huge consequences for that. People are more likely to commit, crimes out of desperation if they feel like there's no economic opportunity for them. you know and that was that's actually quoted by Michelle Alexander, who is a criminal rights lawyer and legal scholar, talk and author of the book The New Jim Crow, because really we are creating a caste system where um, we criminalize and traumatize folks who are poor, who are people of color, etc., while the beneficiaries of the status quo, the slumlords, and the people who benefit from the incredibly high rental market we live in right now, and um, folks who benefit from our struggles, continue to thrive, whereas everyone else continues to struggle. And as these major wealthy folks get things like in subsidies or even tax credits, etc., to gentrify our communities and um, invest in our communities, we get police. And so, so I support reimagining public safety, because not only um, do we need to invest in our communities to make sure that families are whole, but also that's also another way to keep our families safe. Um, I think we also need to rethink, um, policing in this country and certainly in our city, and focus more so on the humanitarian aspect of it, because at the end of the day, we're talking about people. These are the people who are being separated from their families, who are being locked up, etc. At least people have families, and for many folks, the difference of having food on the table, difference of um, knowing that they have a home to live in the next month can make a huge difference between um, you know going to jail or being satisfied. And so but unfortunately, and so that's also why, right, last year we saw the movement for Black Lives erupt, because when we're talking about reimagining public safety, it's not just talking about investing in communities that have been largely defunded, but it's also about holding police accountable. That's also part of the public safety components, because the key word is public, right? We the people, and we have police officers who are supposed to be sworn to protect and serve the public, the people, yet have consistently committed, you know, abused Angelinos, abused Black and Latino folks disproportionately,
That's putting it gently. I mean, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Right, and there's countless examples of misconduct over the past, over generations. Honestly, we don't even have to look at Kentucky or Missouri to see incidents of, or to seek inspiration for justice for police brutality. We can look right here in LA, where in 1965, we had the Watts riots right here in this district as a result of police brutality, as well as due to the poor conditions that folks were forced to endure. 30 years later, almost in 1992, we had the Rodney King trial, which spurred another uprising, starting in South Central LA and spreading all across the city due to another case of systemic injustice and the continuation of the poor conditions that folks are forced to endure. So that's why last year, when our nation was really, I feel like, awakened for the first time in a long time to realities that majority of us are too familiar with, in regards to the reality of police brutality. um
Well,
even
the
in the
thing
midst.
is, people entertain some fantasy that, oh, Rodney King happened and that was terrible, and then everything was fine until recently, and it's like, no, 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 nothing was ever fine, except now people are capturing it on camera because everybody has a camera on their frickin' phone. That's the only thing that changed.
Right, exactly. And so, organizations like Black Lives Matter have really helped make this case even more accessible to people who may not have been aware of it before with the advancement of technology. But right, this has been going on for too long. We've been well aware of this, and there's a historical precedence here. But even still, in the midst of the pandemic, people went out to mass movements all across the country and here in Los Angeles to people from all backgrounds, Black, white, Latino, etc., to raise awareness on this issue. And I was proud to attend a protest last year in Watts, right here in my district. um, but honestly, I was really surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I was hopeful that Joe Buscino would have at least supported the $150 million cuts, which was a
He
compromise.
was one of the people who didn't.
Right. He
Yeah.
was one of two out of 15 council members to oppose that minor cut out of the $1.8 billion LAPD budget. But I guess
Ah, you're allowed to get mad about that, Bryant. You're allowed to get mad.
I am mad, but um, I'm honestly not surprised because Joe
Yeah.
Buscino is a former cop, and there are many times where he's, felt so comfortable, enough that he'll even wear his uniform to city council meetings because he's such a huge advocate for his police officers. And so I wasn't surprised that he voted against it, also for the fact that he has accepted, hundreds of thousands of dollars in money from police associations, and so we can't trust him to hold his fellow police officer accountable, even if it's something as a compromise, 150 million cut out of the $1.8 billion LAPD budget. Um, and so that's why I'm running, because I'm putting people over, profit people over the interest of groups who have benefited from the status quo. Another issue in regards to this accountability, right, is that this has been going on for a long time without um, the necessary systemic changes. Police reform is not enough. We have to, go further. And I think that's why a lot of people voted in large favor of George Gascon for district attorney, for Hollywood Mitchell Valley County supervisor, of which I was part of that campaign. In our district, talking about how, you know, not only is our district, left leaning, but we're a pretty progressive district overall.
Mhm.
And we voted overwhelmingly in 2020 for those major changes. And so now I'm running because the fight, hasn't stopped, just because, we got a better district attorney, or because, um, 45 is no longer president, we still have to make change right here in our district because we still have people in power who are reactionaries and largely opposed to any type of major social reform that our people desperately need.
Oh yeah, and it's but I would say when you really break it down, because yeah, I mean, you have to from the seat you're sitting in, you have to be very thorough and very careful with your words where you're like, well, when I say defund the police, this is what when I say now me, I don't have to do any of that. So I can just straight up say we got to defund the police, we got to abolish the police. I can just say that and explain what I mean. You have to be very thorough in explaining what you mean, but when you really break it down what those ideas are all about, it's just common sense at this point. Yeah, it's
Right.
insane that they're getting these billions of dollars when everything else is getting left out in the cold, when investing in more social services prevents
Right.
crime in the first place. Everyone
Right.
knows this. And also, when you get into the abolish conversation, which I know, first we got to figure out the funding, then we can take the next step. But when you really think about the job of a police officer, it is absolutely beyond insane that that job even exists. It makes
Mm,
no sense. Hey, here's somebody who wasn't screened well, who wasn't trained well. Let's give them a gun and they can just respond to any problem. What could possibly go wrong here? Oh, by the way, they might be in the KKK because we don't
mm,
screen for shit. I don't see any
mm,
problems here. This will go great. No, it won't go great. It'll go terribly. And it has for decades and decades and decades. So it's time to, I think this is what you said in your video. We need to reimagine what law enforcement is and the role it plays in our lives. I'm not advocating that we have no law enforcement whatsoever. People say, oh, so you just, when something happens, there's no one you could call, blah, blah, blah. When you call the cops, what help are they anyway most of the time, first of all? And second of all, no, that's not what we're calling for. We're calling for a better law enforcement system in our lives, which if we came up with something completely new, there's no way it'd be worse.
right. I can't really touch on that. 'Cause I think you really hit the point there in regards to, the fact that these police officers, they are armed, right? They are trained, are supposed to be trained to deal with violent cases. I do think we do need, folks to deal with violent crime, but um, there are so many cases where having a police officer, just having someone with a firearm, is not only inappropriate but also dangerous. When it comes to responding to folks who are experiencing homelessness. What we need to, prioritize is, like you mentioned before, outreach services, homelessness services, helping people get connected to resources, to permanent housing. Because what ends up happening when you use police officers as the first response to homelessness is you have increased, rates of force. And as a result, one out of every third use of force in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, regarding a police officer involves an unhoused Angelino. And, right. And
Yeah.
that's tragic because it's a traumatizing event, and it makes it even harder to connect folks to housing because when they see a uniform the next time, it's triggering. They're less likely to trust, the government, since we've violated, the trust ourselves by, um, abusing them when all they needed or wanted was help. And so you can really judge a society on how it treats its most vulnerable members of the community. And we need to reimagine how we address situations that aren't violent, whether it's a mental health crisis, homelessness crisis, or even traffic stops or even car crashes. Maybe it's unnecessary to have armed, well-equipped armed police officer who, in a matter of seconds, can end someone's life or injure someone. So those are, really serious, and there are many cases all across the country where people, where there's like in DC, can't remember the person's name, but they called the police because their child was having mental health crisis. They didn't know who else to call, so they called 911, and eventually, the child got shot. Um, and it made headlines, and there's a lot of these cases that um, that don't make the headlines, or aren't hashtags. Um, and just because it's not trending anymore, or there's not mass movements, people protesting all across the streets, all across the country right now, doesn't mean that these crises aren't happening. And so these issues are very urgent. So that's why I'm running now, because we can't afford to wait 4 more years for the next case to happen. We need to really change our system immediately.
Oh, absolutely. And you're very good at the diplomacy, by the way. I gotta tip my hat to you. You're very good. You're very good at just putting it in a very where I'm over here and I'm like, these fucks, and you're just like, yeah, it's not. You're doing good. You're doing good.
Thank you.
But so what are some of just to kind of bring it full circle here? First of all, because I lived in Pasadena most recently prior to moving here, and I know Pasadena just switched up the timing of their local elections, and I'm actually not sure off the top of my head if LA did the same thing or not. So when is your actual election going to be in 2022?
Right. So they changed the elections to be aligned with the other citywide races. So June 7th, 2022
Okay.
will be the primary.
Okay, and then the
Yeah.
regular will just be in November in line with
hmm
actual midterms. Is
Right.
that
November
correct?
8th.
Okay, okay.
hmm
So that's I'm pretty sure that's the exact same thing Pasadena did. So I guess both Pasadena and LA did the kind of same thing, but I wasn't positive on that. Um so as far as messaging goes, you are going up against a person who does have a history in this area. So how do you kind of what's your main messaging for just the average person in regards to why a change is necessary and why you're that change?
Right. So my message is we need moral, ethical leadership in City Hall. Um, it is clear as day that money in politics has an impact on the policies that get passed or don't get passed. Busquino has accepted money from the fossil fuel industry, from real estate developers, from police associations, and that has influenced, how he governs. And so for example, just to give, a brief example, a few years ago, there was a Seabreeze scandal, right? In regards to a project, Seabreeze, a developer wanted to build a project in the Harbor Gateway area. This was in 2016. And Busquino, um, sits on the committee where he approves these projects, and Harbor City residents, which are nearby this project, were vehemently opposed to this. But Bustina received $94,000 from that developer, and a few days later, he approved the project. Um, you know, I um, I'm running on a campaign that's not funded or fueled by real estate developers, corporations, fossil fuel companies, or police associations, because I'm running to be more loyal. I'm more loyal to the community, to our constituents, than campaign donors, and so. Um, and so that's part of the message as to why we need change, because we need to really get corruption out of our city politics. We've had too many FBI situations in City Hall and too many scandals going on, and it's an embarrassment for our district to have a council member who is in bed with a lot of these special interests. And it's also detrimental because as he benefits his campaign donors, our communities continue to struggle. And so, more ethical leadership is what I'm running on, because we need more leaders who are beholden to the people and not profits. I'm also running because we need someone who matches our district, not just in demographics. We live in a majority black and brown districts, but we never had a person of color represent us before, but also on our values. Our district is largely progressive. The same district that voted a majority in favor of Bernie Sanders in the primary of last year, voted in favor of Gascon over Jackie Lacey, voted for Holly Mitchell in the Watts Harbor Gateway North area, etc. And so the reason why someone like Busquino is still able to represent a district like this is because we also have very low voter turnout. And that's largely because we've never had someone who really connects with us on the issues that matters most to us and also doesn't relate to us either. And so I'm a renter. I've always been a renter. I live in rent controlled apartments all my life. And so I know what it's like to deal with the anxiety of the day to day, with the month to month, having to pay the rent and knowing whether you'll be able to pay the rents the month after that. And so we live in a majority renter district, majority renter city. Yeah, we don't have any renters on city council, and so I think that also affects the lack of urgency city council has had on pushing for canceling rents right on during
Well,
this
what about
pandemic.
Nithya Raman? Is she a renter or no?
No,
Oh, she's
uh,
not? Okay.
right, but overall, I think her policies that she ran on has been um, pretty good for renters and homeowners alike.
Oh, yeah, I like her. I
Mhm.
just wasn't I just thought she might have been, but yeah, no, I still I mean, I was thrilled that she won, still am, but yeah.
Right. So we
Um,
just need more people to, more fighters like Nietzsche and others to really, um, fight for the people. So yeah,
Absolutely, and I don't wanna I don't wanna harp too much on your opponent, I'd rather make it more about you, but he reminds me of Joe Manchin, and I don't maybe it's because they have the
mm,
same first name, but he kinda reminds me, like, he seems like one of those guys where it's like you're gonna disagree with them on most like, pretty much everything, you're gonna disagree with them, but not only that, but if you were at a bar hanging out with them you just know they would piss you off within the first 5 minutes over something. It wouldn't even be politics related, Brian. It'd be something random, like just some I don't even know what it could be. It'd be a topic that like do you ever meet some of those people where it's like, I didn't even know this topic could piss me off, but you have found a way to piss me off about it because you're
yes,
so unpleasant. That's the type of vibe he gets off. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to say, I'm just saying that's the vibe he gives me. But so where can people go to find out more about you?
right. So we could. So thank you, first of all, by the way, for this space and for giving me the opportunity to speak about my campaign.
Well,
For folks,
I hope it's the first of many. I hope you come back, and I hope we can keep in touch with you throughout this journey. With a fixed fire alarm. Let's
yes,
that's on the agenda for next time. We're gonna fix that fire alarm, and
yes,
but yeah, I'd like to follow your journey because it does affect the community that I live in, obviously, but
right,
also even beyond that, I think it's also a template for people throughout the country because one of the themes on this show is local activism and getting involved in your community and trying to make your community a better place. Because one of the things that you said that's a very that I think is a very famous sentiment is we are judged by how we treat our most vulnerable.
right,
And that is a sentence that sticks out to me, especially as of recent. And in some ways, that makes me more cynical than I've ever been when I look at what our government has done locally and state level and federally. But in other ways, it makes me more optimistic than I've ever been because on that same token, you can look out at your neighborhood and you can look out at the people in your community and you can realize that if it wasn't for mutual aid efforts, if it wasn't for community activists, if it wasn't for your neighbors, um, we'd be a lot worse off than we are. I'm not going to sit here and say everything's rosy. It isn't. We both know that. But
right,
if it wasn't for our community members, whether your community San Pedro or in LA or anywhere else, you think about what's going on in your community. You think about all the organizations in Texas, most of the mutual aid efforts that help people get through what they went through. You
right,
think about efforts all throughout the country, other people we have had on this show in the Northwest and elsewhere. If it wasn't for those types of people who are our neighbors, we'd be a hell of a lot worse off. And that kind of keeps me optimistic.
right. That's true. When our government fails, we keep each other safe. But the government has the obligation, duty to, keep us safe and to fight for us. And so, I definitely resonate a lot with that sentiment. We have a supermajority in California state legislature, yet fracking hasn't been banned. We have a majority in Congress, and we have finally 45 is out of office, but getting something like a $15 minimum wage is such, a struggle when it really shouldn't be. I definitely resonate with all of that. But I also think it also provides an opportunity for us to fight, right? And to bring the change that we want to see. And local government is one of the best ways because it's really local government that has one of the biggest impact on your day-to-day life, whether it's police, the environment, or housing. And so, to learn more about, our vision and our priorities, and also to provide feedback and suggestions, because there's still a work in progress, right? We still have a year way to go.
You're gonna get a bunch of emails today, like fix the fire alarm.
So it's all
Bryant.
about. You can go to my website at Odega for LA. That's ODEGA FORLA.com, and follow me on all social media platforms at Bryant's Odega LA's. So they could see the handle right on the
Yes,
screen.
yes,
Okay,
they
yes,
can. So they see your Twitter handle. Bryant Odega LA is the Twitter handle, and Odega4 spelled out FORLA.com
yes.
is the website, so everyone can go there. And we always say it verbally too for the audio podcast later. Not everyone
Oh,
catches
okay,
the
gotcha.
video. So
Gotcha.
yeah, Bryant Odega LA is the Twitter handle. That's BRYANT ODEGA LA, and then Odega ODEGA for FORLA.com. Check it out. And Bryant, thank you so much for doing what you're doing, and I look forward to tracking your progress here and being in touch. It's inspiring for me and encouraging for me to see somebody stepping up and doing something so necessary in our community, which is running for a very important seat where the person who currently occupies it needs to go.
All right. So thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure being here.
Cheers, buddy. Guys, we'll be back tomorrow, and our guest tomorrow is the punk poet Attila the Stockbroker out of the UK. I'm real excited to talk to that guy. I've been a fan of him for over a decade now. Follow Bryant Odega LA on Twitter, Odega4LA.com. We will see you tomorrow, and in the meantime, you know the drill. Lucy, she says meow, and I say peace. Peace.
Peace.